Mr. Scary Studios.
I recognize what I'm about to write is going to upset a lot of people. I'm not here to offend anyone. I've just reached a point where I can no longer hold this in. There's really nobody I'm close enough to, nobody that would hear what I have to say and not hold my past against me. I've been living life from day to day carrying a burden that has nearly driven me to the point of suicide. It doesn't matter what I do, how much I try to scour out the bad choices left decaying in my past. It's that same burden that stalks me every day. When I go to work, when I'm hanging out with friends, it never ever goes away. The images begin to flood my mind and I can picture her face all over again. Always the same tears. The same expression of fear that was burned across her innocent face. I can't hold her face anymore. I can't keep going on like this. I'm writing this in the hopes that possibly by putting my story out into the world, I can free myself from some of the guilt. Before we proceed any further, you should know that I'm not a good person. Don't get me wrong, I try to be, I really do, but part of me is convinced that this life I try to live right away will never make up for who and what I was before all of this, before the video. You may come away from this hating me, and for that I can't blame you. I spent a good part of my life as a neo-Nazi, while a whole lot of guys I hung out with were doing it for the trend. I saw that life as something more. I was a part of something that I really believed in. It was religion, my religion. At one time, the German people had recreated a section of the world in their own image. I saw Hitler as a prophet, sent to the Aryan people to lead them into fresh era of power and prosperity. I thought Hitler held a vision, but they killed him before he could realize it. I considered myself as one of the chosen many entrusted with a flame that we would take out into the world. We would finish what our great leader had started generations ago. I know now all of that was bullshit. We were all just oblivious cogs inside of an obsolete machine. We were young then. We were furious, angry that we felt like outcasts, angry that this world didn't understand us. And more importantly, it didn't even try. We were all products of broken families, abandonment, abuse. We felt alone out there, exposed. My family had just gotten divorced. The split was sudden and sharp. My parents had just gotten divorced. The split was sudden and sharp. I was 13 at the time, yet I couldn't realize why they did it. The sole thing that made it abundantly clear was that while my mother insisted that I live with her, my father agreed to the arrangement without putting up the slightest hint of protest at the idea. That part hurt. It hurt bad. I was always close to my father, closer than my mother, and I could ever dream of being. I held nothing against my mother, my father, and I just seemed to click. I guessed we were so much alike. Turns out that I couldn't have been further from the truth. With the exclusion of a few brief visits stretched out over the years, I'd never see my father, at least not enough of him, for it to mean anything. I carried on my life from that point under the assumption that my mother had somehow been the cause of everything. I didn't know why she pulled our family apart. I just knew that I resented her for it. I'd find out years afterwards that the reason behind my parents' divorce wasn't my mother as much as it was my father's infidelity. He had been fucking this girl behind Mom's back for about a year. I saw the nasty bitch once when I spent Christmas with the old man, perky, blonde, and stupid. I determined that my mother's obvious replacement was barely out of high school. The whore introduced herself as my father's friend. Even then, it didn't take long for my teenage mind to put two and two together. It was a revelation that only made me withdraw into myself further. Every day I had to look at that cunt. I watched her wander around the house in her tight t-shirts and laced panties. She never saw it as inappropriate dancing around the house half naked. While her boyfriend's teenage son was visiting for a week, she kept fucking doing that. Either she was oblivious to the inappropriate nature of her actions, or she simply didn't care. Even one of those explanations wouldn't have changed the fact that I felt like I was being constantly disrespected. All of it falling out under my father's apathetic watch. He may have been the king of the castle, but in the end, it wouldn't be him calling the shots. Rather, everything that happened in the house was dictated by a dizzy piece of barley legal pussy. Pussy that my father made a point to indulge himself in every day. It was so disgusting. While my father kept his flirtatious gesture toned down in the beginning, he'd eventually get comfortable enough to start repetitively articulating his unfiltered appreciation for all things jailbait. She'd grin and he'd slap her on the ass. It would be moments like those that constantly seemed to happen within my proximity. I tried to dismiss it, act like their interactions weren't driving me mad on a daily basis, while my father saw a walking sex doll. All I can envision was the horror that he made a point to choose over my mom. 2 days before I'd go home, my father would start hounding me to go and do something outside the house. To sweeten the pot, he even gave me $40 and recommended that I catch a movie at the theater across town. I knew what he was trying to do, and I know that he intended on doing it with her. I heard them through the walls nearly every night. They were so loud that I would have to cover my ears with a pillow to get to sleep. Apparently fucking after dark wasn't enough for my dear old man. Apparently he was in the mood for a midday snack. I reluctantly agreed and took the bribe money. I had only been outside of the house for a few minutes when I suddenly felt compelled to go back inside. I returned to the front door only to find that it had been locked. I raced around the house only to find the same with the back door, with no traditional way back in, improvised by climbing through the guest room window. I tried my best to remain calm. I'd learned very quickly that it wasn't my sounds that mattered. Rather, the sounds were occurring from my father's bedroom. Loud, wet gagging, as if someone was being choked behind the threshold that was cracked open, just a few feet ahead of me. As I proceeded forward, the sounds would become more and more acute. Strange, disturbing gurgles carried across the hall. These were sounds that continued to befuddle me, right up until I slowly pushed the door open enough for me to peek through. I was speechless from what I was watching. My father's girlfriend was laying on her spinal column while he forcefully ground her face into her face from an upward angle. At that point, I wasn't a stranger to sex. By then, I had learned the basics along with extra notes that I picked up from other kids in the neighborhood. What I was seeing, however, didn't fall into any of those classes. The exchange had been proceeding on long enough to cause the girlfriend's makeup to start oozing into the sheets beside her. She cringed, she gagged, but she never said stop, nor did she let my father know how uncomfortable she was. She simply lay there in complete submission. As mad as I had been at my father in the days prior, I couldn't help but feel a little pang of admiration at what I was seeing. He was punishing her. He was punishing her, and she deserved every minute of it. The explicit moment would last for another 10 uncomfortable minutes before my father ended up in a scream that resounded through the empty house. As soon as my father collapsed in exhaustion, I watched as the girlfriend slowly started to gather herself, quickly placing a hand over her smeared mouth to keep any of my father from spilling out, and she proceeded to get off the bed. taking a few disjointed steps into the adjoining bathroom. That night, all I could think about would be what I watched in that bedroom. It took me hours to get to sleep. The next morning, I awakened up to find that my father had left earlier to get an oil change before taking me back home that afternoon. As I walked through the house, I detect that my father had gone alone. The TV was playing in the living room. On the couch laid the girlfriend passed out, wearing her usual t-shirt and panties. I attempted to get her attention, but she didn't even move. I must have stared at her for 15 minutes, every second spent thinking about how my father punished her, how she deserved everything she received. I wanted to practice what my father did. I wanted to punish her too. I foolishly convinced myself that I'd practice what I envisioned, and she wouldn't try to stop me. I crawled on top of her snoring body and positioned myself like I had seen earlier. She opened her eyes right as I began to fidget with my zipper. She said nothing in those first few seconds. Once it finally set in, she let out a scream that hurt my ears before pushing me off into the floor. She then quickly dashed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. When my father got home, I knew that he would be bursting into my room shortly after. It all happened faster than I even thought it would. He kicked my ass like I was simply another guy off the street. When all was said and done, he threw me a towel, gave me enough money for a bus ticket, then ordered me to get the fuck out of his house. He never told my mother why he sent me back along the bus. He never told her why he abruptly decided to cut the visits from the Blue Moon down to almost non-existent. I couldn't have cared less. As far as I was concerned, my father was dead. Nobody has a shit about me, so I wouldn't give a shit about them. I soon became the atone of adolescent delinquency. It was during that time that I approached by a skinhead at the skate park. They were throwing a party and inviting kids from around the neighborhood. I decided to go, and my life changed forever. I could tell right away that they were the people I belonged to. We were the orphans of society, but we were also the descendants of proud people, a proud race, a pure race. When you feel small and marginalized, of course, your ears are going to perk up when somebody says that you're better than the majority of the people out there simply because I was born with a genetic lottery ticket. Prior to joining, I never considered myself racist. I actually didn't even know anyone who was black or Jewish. Most of the people in my hometown were white. So something like that never even crossed my mind. In the end, it was never about those we went after. It was about being part of something. I finally had a family of my own. My mother went off on me when she found out how I was spending my time away from home. She told me that she refused to let a Nazi sleep under her roof. I didn't argue. I went away. I ended up moving in with my friend Torch. We both felt so accomplished and motivated. We felt we were unbeatable. My life continued on that track in the years to come. I intimidated people. I offended people. I did whatever it was required of me. It was a vicious cycle that would go on before suddenly derailing the moment I saw that video. You're probably questioning how a video can suddenly change a person's opinion overnight. I can tell you now with no exaggeration that my opinion doesn't just change. Every fiber of my being changes. And it didn't occur overnight. It happened as soon as I turned off my computer. I couldn't sleep that night, so I got on the net and started cruising the usual white power websites and message boards. I couldn't find anything to keep my interest. That's when I decided to boot up Tor and hit the deep web for something that I could sink my teeth into. The site installed Promised Land. It's a deep web message board dedicated to all things controversially white power related. The sites that people can find on the surface web are light to say the least. The government set about cracking down on anything that could be considered extremist behavior. When that happened, people took off heading to the dark web, where nobody could censor what they decided to say or do. The most extreme thing I'd ever seen on Promised Land was a 40-second clip of some guys dragging the dead body of a dark man behind their truck. There was no way of telling if the man was dead before they set about dragging him or after. I'll be the first to allege that I'm not proud that I watched that, but the truth is the truth. The video segment was usually cluttered with recorded lectures, how-to weapon footage, and occasional Aryan Barbie doing a striptease. The line-up was different that night. The top-rated video had siphoned the majority of user votes. The title was Uncle Adolph's Wonderful Puppet Show. The comments were insane. The people writing them seemed overly stirred up for some reason. Some of the people demanded more videos like it, while others explained in particular how they couldn't watch the whole thing. The chatter just made me more curious. I downloaded the MP4 and clicked play. I wish I could take that back. The video was distorted, jumpy. The footage looked like it had been shot almost a decade ago. Everyone around the camera spoke fluent German. The person holding the camera is talking to a beautiful short-haired woman with a roguish grin on her youthful face. They seem to be inside of some sort of warehouse or mill. The woman lured the camera down a flight of rusted spiral stairs. They continued talking to each other as they worked their way down a seemingly endless number of steps. The further down they go, the more we start to pick up noises. It sounds like it's coming from a bunch of people. The footage just jumps forward. The woman was now sitting next to the cameraman, running her mouth as he zoomed in and away of her attractively round face. The two were sitting inside of an auditorium, old yet maintained. The interior looked as if it's made for theater productions. The auditorium was taken with other chatty Germans. The footage jumped forward again, only now everybody in the auditorium was standing. They all Heil Hitler, while an aged anthem played through the old speakers that wired throughout the auditorium. The anthem concluded and everyone sat back down. The lights began to dim, just as the stage curtains started to function. Everyone begins clapping. We get to see what's on the stage. Stationed at the center is a large metal replica of Adolf Hitler sitting down in a chair. The giant Adolf had to be at least 15 feet tall. There are regions of the figure that have rusted, even some of the paint had begun to crack, exposing the sharp-looking metal behind Hitler's grinning face. While metal Hitler's left arm was resting, the right had been positioned straight up. Likewise, unlike the left. The right arm didn't end up with a hand, rather a mesh of jagged metal barbs. If you looked closely, you could see that right arm was connected to a jumble of thick wires that extended from the metal Hitler all the way to a complicated looking electrical box. The old metal bus inside Hitler began to churn and click. We watch as the flesh begins to move in the chair, like a lurching animatronic. Hitler's eyes started flashing as it spoke a series of idioms. The voice was old and muffled, distorted like the kind you'd hear at a fast food drive-thru. A man appears on a stage. He's dressed in like a circus ringmaster. The only major adjustment to his outfit is a large swastika sewn onto his top hat. He's pushing a big box on wheels. The cube is covered with a black tarp that is quickly withdrawn when the man comes to a stop. Underneath the tarp isn't a box, it's a cage. Inside there's a woman curled in the fetal position. She's of African lineage. Her clothes were in shreds, and she looks as if she's been physically abused recently. The louder she cried, the louder the audience cheered. More men came on stage. They opened the cage and forcefully removed the woman from her prison. While they struggled to draw her out, a strange-looking contraption began to lower from above the curtains, stopping just above to the raised Hitler arm. The creation was formed mostly of metal, with a series of leather straps located at the four ends. The men hoisted the woman up into the contraption, despite her protest. They yet managed to strap her in. She hollered, she begged. They only laughed at her at this point. The audio in the video would become drowned out by the animalistic screams of the audience. The contraption started up one time more. It lowered the screaming woman onto the upper side of the jagged metal. The powerful hydraulics pushed her down into the razor-sharp metal like a human eraser onto a pencil. The sounds she made were indescribable. The farther down she was pushed, the more blood flowed down the mechanical Hitler's arm. After a few minutes, the woman would give out from shock. The audience started booing loudly. The ringmaster assures them that there is still one more to come. The ringmaster looks to the man standing near the electrical box. He nodded, and the man pulled the lever down. Sparks flew from the box as electricity rapidly traveled through the box, all the way through the metal arm that bore the woman up. Her body began to jolt uncontrollably, while her teeth chattered so loud. You could pick up the sound well into the audience. The mechanical Hitler started to act and talk as if this was going on. Moments later, the applause would be deafening. After the video stopped, the video disappeared from the forum a few days afterwards. Not that it mattered. I'm sure it's still floating about somewhere right now. Some sick fuck is probably watching it. Me, I left all that shit behind. All I can do now is try to keep the pieces together. All for those of you out there who think hate empowers you, let it go. Just let it die. You have no clue what real hate is. Real hate creeps through your blood like venom. It's a blackness that invades every inch of your body until it ultimately gives its claws around your heart. Once real hate has gotten it full of you, it leaves behind a withered husk of something that could have been called a human being. I've seen real hate, and I've spent every day since wishing I hadn't.